Korea's most famous Shin ramen, but why is there a Chinese word on it? Isn't it a Korean brand? What if I told you that this word isn't Chinese? It's actually Korean. Well, it's not just Korean. Japanese has them too. In any Japanese media, no matter the source, you're bound to find examples of kanji, Chinese characters, that are fully part of the Japanese language. So I know what you're thinking. Don't Korean and Japanese already have their own writing systems? What possible reason would there be for them to take from China when Japan already has Pokemon and Korea has BTS? Like, come on, you guys already got those two. What could have possibly encouraged them to steal Chinese for themselves? China was the first to create its own writing system. The first Chinese characters can be traced to over 4,000 years ago. But they only really started looking like the Chinese words we know today after the early 3rd century, when regular script, or Shu in Mandarin, came into play. This made China a dominant cultural and linguistic force in Asia, allowing them to have a rich cultural and literary heritage for far longer than their peers. Meanwhile, neighboring countries like Korea and Japan were also developing their own cultures and languages. Meetings with a cultural powerhouse like China were crucial to this, whether it was for trade, diplomacy, or cultural exchanges of literature, art, and scientific discoveries. The only problem? Koreans and Japanese didn't have any script of their own. This made cultural exchange a little trickier. Like, how do you translate text into a language that only exists in speech? The solution was simple. Instead of creating a writing system from scratch, Korean and Japanese simply used pre-existing Chinese characters in place of their own words. This was called hanja in Korean and kanji in Japanese. The adoption of Chinese characters was further influenced by the spread of Buddhism in East Asia. Religious texts, scriptures, and rituals were all in Chinese. So naturally, when they were brought to Korea and Japan, the Chinese language tagged along. The thing is though, Korean and Japanese already existed orally, so the pronunciation of hanja and kanji were a little different to their Chinese counterparts. For example, the word for big is pronounced da in Mandarin and dai in Cantonese, while in Korea that same character is pronounced day. I can't speak Korean, I hope that's right. And in Japanese, dai. I swear to God, I hope I'm right. Same thing for the word door, right? In Mandarin, it's men. In Cantonese, it's moon. However, in Korean, in hanja becomes moon and mon in kanji. In the same way as two different dialects of Chinese, Mandarin and Cantonese, pronounce the same word, same meaning, but in a different way, Korean and Japanese were the exact same. And also, fun fact, this character over here, this Korean word, you know how it's pronounced shin ramen? This character is actually pronounced shin in Mandarin or sun in Cantonese, which is both quite close to shin. Am I the only one who geeks out about that and thinks that's super cool? Oh, I'm not. Comment if that's you guys as well. Hanja and kanji were game changers for Korean and Japanese history. They were used in official documents, literature, and scholarly works. They were more than simply words borrowed from another language. In fact, they provided a means to record the Korean language, history, and culture in a space that previously only existed orally. With Chinese characters, Korea and Japan were able to do something they were unable to do previously, which is record and share their own writings amongst themselves and the rest of the world. The adoption of Chinese characters offered practical benefits. For both Korea and Japan, it facilitated communication and trade with China, the dominant regional power. It also allowed these countries to access and contribute to the vast body of Chinese literature and science and philosophy. This exchange of knowledge was invaluable for the development of their own cultures. So why don't we see more Chinese in Korean and Japanese today? Like, what changed? If it was such a big part of their history and it had such a big impact for them, why'd they take it out? Why does this only have one Chinese word here, and then what's this weird gibberish over here? Well, this is Chinese, but I'm saying this part over here is Korean. Well, it all comes down to cultural identity. Korean and Japanese both have sentence structures and grammatical rules that are separate from Chinese. They're not the same, which makes hanja and kanji actually difficult to use outside of scholarly works. On top of that, Chinese decided to be extra obnoxious and forego an alphabet system entirely. So we all know how hard learning Chinese is. So writing in hanja or kanji was actually reserved for scholars and nobility. The average Korean or Japanese civilian wasn't gonna know how to read, let alone write it. Just think about it. Like, I went to Chinese school for 9 years growing up, and every single Saturday I studied Chinese. And when I was in high school, I forgot all of it. Like, I couldn't write my Chinese name. I learned it now, but like, for half my life, I could not read a single word of Chinese, and I'm Chinese. This doesn't matter for them, they're not Chinese. Like, how hard is it to learn Chinese, right? So, China, you couldn't just make an alphabet system? Like, why you gotta go these crazy characters, man? It's not easy, China. So a solution had to be found. Korea opted to create a whole new writing system altogether, the one that we know today as Hangul. So if you look at the Shin Ramyun, it's these two characters right here. Created in the 15th century, Hangul was made to be easy to learn in order to increase nationwide literacy, as well as to be made directly consistent with Korean phonetics. But it wasn't until the aftermath of World War II, following the end of Japan's occupation of Korea, that Hanja, Chinese Korean, was completely replaced by Hangul as part of a widespread cultural and linguistic purification movement. Like, I went to a Korean art museum in LA, and it's interesting because if you go back, like way back, a lot of art has Chinese characters, but none of the modern art, all of them don't have them anymore. I've been to Seoul and I barely see any Chinese anywhere anymore, but if you think back like over 100 years ago, there's probably a lot of Chinese everywhere. Today, Hanja is mostly reserved for Sino-Korean words, and Sino means Chinese. Korean words with Chinese origins, for clarification or for cultural or aesthetic reasons, such as in Shin Ramen. Despite this, many Korean words, especially those with science, culture, and formal context, are derived from Hanja. So it's impossible to take away the deep cultural impact that Chinese characters had on the Korean language. Japan had a different approach to the problem. How are they going to get their people literate? Instead of just throwing away Chinese characters altogether, they instead made 2 new scripts to use as well, which seems a little more complicated. They have katakana in the early 9th century that they made, and hiragana in the 1900s. These scripts provided flexibility in writing, as well as increased literacy among the general population. Kanji, which is Chinese characters, is still found everywhere in Japanese, remaining a fundamental part of the language. Like if you watch Demon Slayer, it says Chinese in their clothing. And it's used daily with hiragana and katakana, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere time soon. The thing that's nice about going to Japan, though, as you're a Chinese person, is you could probably figure out the definition of a lot of things just because a lot of them do actually have Chinese characters on it. So I can get around there. So going back to it, why did Korean and Japanese borrow so many Chinese words? It was not just about adopting a writing system, it was about embracing a rich cultural and intellectual heritage. And by borrowing Chinese words, Korea and Japan connected themselves to a broader cultural and historical context, enhancing their languages and cultures. Now though, there's no denying that Korea and Japan have their own unique cultural histories. I mean, they got Pokemon and BTS. People living in these countries today are starting to ask, are kanji and hanja even relevant anymore? What use are Chinese characters when they have their own language system? What used to be a requirement in education has now become another option among a sea of languages. Begs the question, what's going to happen in the future, even 4 years from now? Will this Shin Ramen still have the packaging that we're all used to? Will it still have this random Chinese word, or will Koreans discard hanja altogether? What do the people of these countries think about it? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoy learning more about Chinese language and culture, then subscribe to my channel. Otherwise, click here for a video that you think you'll love.